I've been a part-time taxonomist because I've done all these other things. But it's really, I think, where my heart is to some degree. And I've been quite surprised how much vegetation got under my skin and how much, when you look at a lot of vegetation, you find that it's a really wonderful thing. But we're not talking about that now, we're talking about taxonomy and taxonomist view of knowledge of the flora and how that affects EIA. Taxonomy is about naming, and I sometimes wonder whether taxonomy shouldn't be renamed. I'm not very good at Latin, but something derived from masochism, or maybe something derived from the 2/4 blind arguing with the 3/6 blind, because we sometimes go around in circles. But those are arguments for another day. Let's move along. What does knowledge of the flora of Western Australia mean? Does it mean how many species, how many subspecies and varieties, how many identification aids, how many flora treatments, Indigenous knowledge, how we improve knowledge, what tools we use to improve knowledge, i.e. how we get knowledge, how what we think we know relates to what the actual total is, knowledge of whom, young versus old, herbarium taxonomists versus vegetation field workers, and sort of, because I don't think we should be too serious, but there's actually a point to this, what cows know about how different native species taste and how that differs from what kangaroos know. Or a bit of all the above. Maybe we should turn it on its head and say the knowledge, the flora of WA or Australia, the knowledge the flora has of WA or Australia. Now, a little background. This is a trick question. Who knows what the background to the slide is? Okay. The little background to my slide, or all of Australia, actually is a thing called Topographic Wetness Index, which in all honesty I have to say I only found out about it a couple of weeks ago. And the knowledge of the flora about Australia is how to integrate a complex background like this. Oops, go back to there. And in the bottom right-hand side of the slide, there's a couple of different scales of that background. So it's integrating a complex background like that, which is basically how water runs off the high bits into the low bits, and so you've got a wetness, dryness boundary over in every little bit of topography. So how does the flora cope with that sort of complex background, dealing with a whole pile of other factors, and there's a little asterisk at the bottom, and survive over time while also coping with things like predation and fire? And these are just some examples of different factors, and the point is the maps have some similarities at times, but at other times they're completely unrelated. And so there's some great big integration going on of all these different factors. So we can say that plants are solving a multifactorial equation with numerous solutions. Each of the solutions is a taxon, species, subspecies, or variety. Seeing as I have trouble solving simple equations and I've got a brain and they haven't, they're pretty clever. Are they better than us at finding those solutions? In other words, are we good at it? Maybe we should just ask them, the plants, how they do it. A shame they can't speak, but there may be some other ways to query them. So we're going to have a fireside chat with Mr. Anura Pilbara, who's known as Mulga to his mates. Okay, so Malcolm is the interrogator. Malcolm to Mulga, how do you solve your equation up here, mate? And Mulga says, well, I picked a nice neighbourhood. Well, the Hamersley Range is as good as you can get. He says he likes the elevation for a nice view. He's got a nice range of soils, and he likes a bit of a good sunny day. So he's got a lot to cope with. But he says, Mulga says to Malcolm, Malcolm, to survive up here, you need the right friends. And so we get to a little bit of a comparison of how mulgars behave in the Pilbara. And there's a backstory to this, and it overlaps with something Kevin said. I did a very rough sort of mulgars out of a large survey in late 97, 98, and threw some horrible little things like grey flat recurved tips on them, mounted up a set, labelled them, and gave them to the herbarium. Well, it was a bit of a shock, but Bruce was very kind, that's Bruce Maslin. He sent them off to Les Pedley. Les Pedley sent them back with 2 or 3 names. I've got the letter somewhere, I can't remember, but it didn't fit. So I just went on naming them, naming new specimens to those rough field names. Now, one of the advantages of integrated data sets is you can start to compare things. So a kind friend of mine has compared the behaviour of these mulgars in a species by species table. And he tells me, and he's good at this stuff, that the way they co-occur, and that's related to other species that we accept as species, says these things are behaving as species. In other words, their behaviour, their relationships to the environment, what they grow with, is that of species. All those things on the left-hand side above the broad yellow line, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, currently treated as one entity. In spite of the fact that what Kevin suggested we do, take them in, get some resolution, wasn't done. Okay, moving on. It's a fact that taxonomists largely don't taxonomise on the basis of colour, which is generally good, but there are always exceptions to a rule. Let's ask Polycarpia longiflora, who I suspect a lot of you know, who we unfortunately can't rename Polycarpia multichroma because of the rules, how she solves her equation. Now, I was a bit worried about calling her her, but I called Mulga he, so I thought I had to be fair. She is not a shy flower and likes to grow in the open to show off her different coloured attire, which she changes for different places. And again, the value of integrated data sets. So you can read the little top right-hand corner, red equals the red form, and I'll backstep. I looked at these things and I noted that they tended to grow in different places. I looked in the flowers, couldn't find much, but I thought, well, I'll just keep calling them coloured forms and we'll see what happens. I eventually found a slight difference in filament length. Anyway, I ended up with 4 different ones with the different colours, plus a whole pile of records, the black ones, that either were old or sterile or I didn't do the IDs. Now, you can see from the map that the different coloured things have different distributions. The red patch on the Burrup is disjunct 120 or so kilometres from the other red ones. The red ones are mostly in the Hamersley Range or along a little bit of similar geology on the edge of the Chichester Range. The 2 green ones, which are probably a rare entity, but we don't really know because we haven't looked at enough rock piles, grow on rock piles. And because of the way these different coloured things grow, or what they grow with, you can actually predict what the black ones are with about 90% accuracy. So these are species, and yet we don't accept them. And I wouldn't even, I have not felt brave enough to try and get this one up. But just going back to the map of the distribution of Polycarpia longiflora on ABH, you notice 2 things. There's a big disjunction between the Pilbara and the Kimberley's Northern Territory. There's a couple of scattered localities in Queensland, and there's a patch on the Gulf that's a bit disjunct. Well, we've got pretty good evidence that there's 4 entities in the Pilbara. There's different coloured forms with the same leaf type in Kimberleys, and a significantly different leaf type. So my guess is 10 plus. Okay, Cleome viscosa, once thought to be a weed in Australia, at least that's my memory. I'm getting old, so it's a bit unreliable. 5 weeks ago, I was going through some old material that was given to me by another consulting firm, deciding what to chuck and what to keep to back up my Pilbara reference data set. And I look very carefully these days, and so I discovered that there were different seed types, different colours, and it's not a very good photo, but the ridges on the reddy brown one are much better defined than on the darker one. I haven't had time to look at it closely, but I think there were 3 or maybe 4 seed types from one survey, Solomon survey, so mine plus rail, 150 kilometres. So there's not a good disjunction between that and the Kimberleys, but there's a hint of it. If there are 4, at least in the Pilbara, my guess on that distribution is well north of 15. Hakeolaurea, subspecies Laurea. I noticed a few years ago that there might be 2 slightly different fruit. And when I was going through some of that pile of material from Solomon, I thought I'd better check the fruit. No, there were 4 between that and my ref set. There's differences in leaf diameter. I did a very rough dry section of a few. One had deeper palisade cells than the others. So you would look at that map of Australia and say, it's a complex. I'm not even going to guess how many. 15, 20, I fibbed. There are many undescribed taxa in the Pilbara, but it's a long way from Perth and was poorly collected until recently. I'm just going to go back for a second, just to say, if you look at that disjunction between the Pilbara and the Kimberleys, it's very, very common, like more than 200 times, I would guess. So that's probably at least 200 undescribed subspecies. There are other disjunction patterns like that around Western Australia that are at least subspecies. Okay, so how could we get an idea of how well known the flora is in the southwest of Western Australia? And the point of this for EIA is if you don't poke around, you don't find out, and then you don't put the truth or the reality. Truth is what you think you know. You don't put the reality in your report. So I thought I would have a trawl through part of an icon genus. It might be fun. Why an icon genus? Because they're better known. So if you go to some horrible rotting genus that nobody takes any account of, well, it's going to be poorly known. If you go to an icon genus, you're going to think, well, maybe they're well known. And this is all a bit interesting. So let's go on. Now, this is, and I have to apologise, so I'm not going to be able to read the names out. This is a Banksia, and I picked Banksia because Alex George did some wonderful work on it over a long period of time. It's had a Banksia study group, well, Banksia plus Greyandra. So it's had these study groups. Now, if you look at the 2 factors we've got there, you've got some disjunctions. There's some correlation between the disjunction and the factors. So you'd have to think there might be some entities in that, maybe varieties. That'd give you 4 out of 1 if it held up. Banksia ashbei, Alex has described 2 subspecies. And let me just say, in case anybody has any doubt, I greatly admire Alex's contribution to the flora. These tools were not available when he was doing his work. So the 2 big rectangles on the right-hand side are the 2 well-defined subspecies. In the Kennedy Range, different geology, different climatic situation, because it's inland. You've got a disjunct patch. It's a pretty big disjunction, so classic subspecies. The little box on the bottom is disjunct. It's in different bioregion to the biggest box. The Irwin River is a significant boundary. That's the boundary of the bioregions. So certainly an increase of one subspecies plus maybe one variety. Banksia biterax. On the flora-based map you have two nice little patches, one name, it's a big disjunction. When you look at it in more detail, you've got 3 records high up in the Stirling Ranges. The Calgan River separates, and the Barongarups separate that from the Albany patch, and the Calgan River separates the Albany patch from the other coastal ones. At least 3 subspecies. 2 should probably be on the priority list or the DRF list. Whether you'd worry about the one in the Stirlings about that, I don't know. It's protected. It's pretty clear though, that's not one entity. And if you look at increase 3, maybe 4. Again, what you've got here is a disjunction. It doesn't look much on the flora-based map. When you look at it on AVH, which is the right-hand map, it's priority or DRF. The localities are spread out so people can't go and steal bits. So it's hard to interpret a bit. There's a vague possibility in the main patch that there's a division along the wetter area, the near vertical yellow line, but I wouldn't put any weight on it until you've done something. But there's a serious disjunction between the main patch and the patch on the Dandaragan Plateau. So that little patch probably deserves a name, probably deserves to go on the priority list. Banksia elderiana, look at the flora-based map, you've got a bit of a disjunction. You put it onto the geology, separated, different geologies, separated by things like drainage channels. It's got to be 2 subspecies. So 100% increase. Banksia incana, the big green ellipse, the name variety is overlap, and you think there's probably not much in that, or either that or they're on some soil factor that's too detailed. Then you've got the 2 smaller ellipses. They're going to be different.